everyone. I'm Alda Leu Dennis, General Partner at Initialized Capital, and I wanted to welcome you to our next episode of Fortitude. We'll be talking to founders about their hardest weeks that they've had in their entrepreneurial journey and what they did to overcome those challenges. Joining me on the show today is Robyn Exton, CEO and founder of Her, a dating and community app for queer women, non-binary, trans, and gender non-conforming folks. Robyn, thank you so much for being on the show and welcome to Fortitude.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. I'd love to hear a little bit about what made you want to start Her.
I started Her a long time ago now. I was working at a brand consultancy and a brand strategy agency, and one of my clients was a dating business, and they had a platform where they would create new brands and different propositions, and working with that client just really helped me see and understand everything that was happening in the dating world at the time. And it was a really interesting time. Grindr had come out 2-3 years prior. They were changing everything. Tinder was just starting in the US, and everything was at this point of moving from dating websites to this concept of apps and what that would look like. At the same time, about 6 months prior to that, I had started dating, making out with women, figuring out a lot more about my sexuality. But people call it the pink haze, where it was just enjoying what it was like to be part of this new community and figuring stuff out. I had just started using this, the main lesbian dating website at the time in the UK, which was clearly not built for women. It was built for gay men. And at the time, while working with this client, just knew what else was out there and knew what was happening. And in my 24-year-old brain was there should be something better. How hard can this be? I should totally do this. So over the course of the next kind of year or so, started to think about building something, built up a bit of confidence, learned how to code, started exploring the startup world a bit more. And then eventually in 2013, first created an app that got published to the App Store. That was the start of everything.
And what are the insights you have about why a dating website for queer women is going to be different for one that's more targeted towards men?
So at the time, when I first started, it was, Grindr was this model that I was so inspired by. And so the actual very first version of the app that we created was really similar to Grindr. And I think at the time I didn't understand. I knew that the branding needed to feel different, but I didn't really understand about product and user experience and how the jobs to be done are different for people with different gender identities and different socialized and raised in different ways. Their emotions are different, their outcomes are different. And so when the app worked like Grindr, it just totally didn't work at all. Grindr is for people who are meeting up very quickly with one very clear goal. And it is a very motivated audience who are moving really fast to get to that outcome. For us, we have people who are much more explorative. They're looking for a whole range of different relationships. They're looking for community. They're looking for love. They're looking for something casual. They're looking for someone to explore with. They're looking for friendship. And so proximity is not relevant at all. Having, just face pictures doesn't really do the trick to start a conversation. We have users who our whole community based has been raised and told not to be chasing and proactive and pushing conversations on people. And that leads to we have a big thing in our community of having to really encourage users to message each other once they've matched, holding their hands through all the different steps of the journey. We've had this really big side of the product, which is around our community. And so making spaces for people to connect outside of just romantic and sexual relationships. If you move to a new city and you want to connect with a queer community, Her is a place that you can do that in. You can find people with similar identities, similar interests, and that's stuff that you're just not going to find on an app for hetero communities or for gay men.
And what do you think of as your sort of measure of success for the community?
Well, so for the whole app and whole experience, our measure of success is a conversation between two people. So that's more than two messages back and forth. Again, something definitely more prolific in queer women and queer community is long distance relationships are way more common than you would get probably for straight folks and for gay men. So that conversation is actually really what we say, this is how far we'll take you. We want you to have a connection and a conversation. And after that, it's on you what happens next. So we don't mind if that's someone from Germany and someone from Canada making the connection, or if it's two people in Bushwick making the connection and then meeting up. We just want to build that connection between two people.
And it's almost been 10 years on this journey. And I'd love to talk a little bit about, what you've learned along the way, how you've sort of made it through. And I know that you haven't raised a lot of capital and still have been, very successful at building out the community, and talk a little bit about the metrics that you've achieved so far.
Yeah. I was talking to a lawyer who I worked with in the very early days, and I think she's had like 4 jobs. And then we spoke again and I was like, and I'm still here. Which is great. It's amazing. It's like, we're here because we are succeeding and we've done something really impactful. And there's so much more opportunity that's evolved even for our space as this business has existed and grown. It's nearly 10 years. I had a slower start, I would say. The first kind of 3 years was this product that wasn't quite right. It was me learning about tech and startups. I'd say a big chapter started when I moved to San Francisco. And that was when I raised the round of money. And that kind of set off this whole next chapter. And so, we raised $2.5 million in 2015, and we haven't raised anything since then. So at the moment, the business runs on revenue, which is awesome. I am so grateful to do that. And I think it's interesting now, we weigh up the idea of taking more funding, what is our next chapter and what is the money that we need to do it. And I just know that it's a very different conversation when I don't need to take someone's money, that I choose to take someone's money because I know that team, that person will get us to the next vision and milestone, not because I just have to take anything to keep the lights on. And it just gives a lot more agency over the control of the business. But the general place of where we're at is we're a team of 25 of us. And the app has, our big number is registered 10 million queer folks that have come through the product. And the app operates in 114 countries in 5 languages. We are very focused on connecting queer people together. It's largely used for romantic and sexual relationships. Community is this big added, it's we say come for dating and stay for community. I think what's really interesting about where we'll end up going is that the 10 years that I've been running this business, I started this talking about lesbian and bisexual women. That was my understanding of my identity and my community at the time. And the way we talk about gender and sexuality has dramatically changed during that time. The concept of gender fluidity, gender queerness has evolved, how people acknowledge and explore their identity is really different. And now we have this really interesting evolution, particularly with Gen Z, about how they see and reflect on their sexuality and gender identity, which is not something that I would have seen happening at such a big scale in the way that is happening. And so it's grown our market, which is amazing, and I believe better for humanity, but also opens up really interesting opportunities for where we go next and the different people that we can serve, because we are the experts in this space that a lot of people didn't see as a big space or see as a big opportunity because they thought it was just a niche market.
Along the way, I know you've had some tough spots. I'd like to talk a little bit about what one of the toughest spots for you was, and how you pulled through that.
Yeah, so I think the pits, the worst, the worst of all of it. It's one of those tough ones because I'm a British person. I get uncomfortable with emotions, and it's just a super emotionally charged time. So sometimes I'll be laughing because it's so nasty. It was 2019. We're running on revenue, so cash is absolutely critical, and it was still at a point where everything was on such a fine line. It was such a challenging time. We'd had some good years, things that started going bad. And as the background for context, our metrics have been going down for 3 to 4 months. And it just puts a lot of pressure on the team and our need to perform. It's we all have visibility of that. We know people are going to lose jobs if we don't resolve these issues. And so there was a lot of pressure. We had to stop working on any product development. It was just figure out what's going wrong. We've got to find this problem before we, dip into we run out of money, basically. So everyone was very focused on that. So we were a team of 10 people. We had an events business, which used to have people running parties in different cities. someone had been running our parties. Jolene had been running our parties in Seattle for a couple of years. We'd just hired her full time to join and run all of our global parties. She'd been moved to San Francisco, been in the office with us for 3 months, and incredibly unexpectedly, she passed away. And it was at a weekend, had a phone call from one of the other teammates who had heard from someone else. And it's so upsetting. It's like, someone who's a good friend that passes away. And it was really challenging, running a company and running a team of people who care about this person so much, and having to tell the team, having to tell people that used to work with us, having to work out how to process my own grief and upset, and also how to keep the company alive while we were going through this stuff. And as much as everyone's going through this devastating trauma, we also want to be able to keep paying people salaries and keep the company going and keep things moving forward. So that was incredibly challenging. It was really upsetting. I think in the outcome at the end of it, it also ended up bringing us very there was this shared experience that we'd all had, and which was then challenging to navigate when new people joined the company, and there was this deep bond between some of us that had been there and then other people that hadn't experienced it. After all this had happened, probably 3-4 weeks later, one of my larger Czech investors, most of our money that we'd raised has been as convertible notes. One of the investors reached out and said that they wanted to recall their $500,000 note when I had $200,000 in the bank. And I was just fuck, I don't know what to do. It was just so
they hadn't funded yet.
The cash was I'd taken their money 2 years ago, and they
okay. They asked for their money back.
Yeah.
Wow.
At that time, when they knew what was happening, they knew how much money we had in the bank.
Yeah.
And so at the time, I think just the hardest thing about that happening was the thought that the team were working so fucking hard, we'd gone through this thing together. And then to know, and so what they wanted was a payment plan for them to be able to withdraw the money out. And so it was any time, if we just get our heads above water, if we start to, make 50K profit, or at that time it was make 15K profit 1 month. What I want to do is give the team another person to join the company. So it's not this insane workload for everyone to balance, but instead of being able to hire one other person, I have to pay back this investor over the next 2 to 3 years, frankly, at that rate of how it's going to take. We're never going to be able to make it out of there. That was.
Do you agree to do it?
In the end, we did not do it, through a lot of difficult and navigating conversations. But in my mind, it was just this is dumb. We have a business that is making this much money. You can see that. We are going through a tough time at the moment, and we will figure this out. And in my head, I'd been thinking that I trusted these people, and I was maybe I'll ask if they want to put some more cash in to help us through this next 6 months to come out the other side, because we can see there's money here. It's just figuring out these things. And instead they were JK, we're actually going to try and pull all the money out. In the end, they didn't. Lucky them, they're going to make a shit ton of money at the end of this, because they did keep their money in. Yeah, it was a very, very bad. It ended up being a kind of 3-month period really through all of it. And it was grueling.
I think about that a lot as we sort of navigate the current world, thinking about how there's so much terrible things going on, and for myself, how to explain them to my children, but also maintain a sense of day-to-day and a sense of purpose, and being able to continue and persist in what we're doing, and how to sort of balance that out.
A lot of people experience and talk about stuff like the investor stuff, those things are big and they are common, and these are things that we have to navigate. But then there's these individual emotional, super emotionally charged, mountains that you're going up and down from. And running a company, you're double tracking these two things happen at the same time. One is you're processing your own personal realization, response, navigating, it comes out about Roe versus Wade, being overturned the other week. And I'm thinking about my personal reflection on that. And at the same time, our team and our company are thinking about it, and it's super relevant to our business, our users, our community. And so we need to be talking about it. And you're trying to then at the same time in an appropriate time period, make a supportive, healthy environment, conversation, a way for this group of people that work with you all the time to be able to talk about that together. And it's it's crazy to do both at the same time. I think as time goes on, the more I get used to realizing that what has to happen. I think what's hard is the first few times it happens, you don't realize that's the responsibility or role that you play. And it's a lot to figure out.
Yeah, while having to make sure that there's enough cash in the bank account to make payroll. And turning to the second thing that you mentioned in terms of investor sentiment, do you think we're facing a period of time where we're going to be seeing more and more bad behavior with the bull market? You don't hear stories about that very often because it was so competitive to get into deals. But I remember in 2010, when I was at a startup, we had investors who colluded behind our backs to get on a phone call, and several of them wanted to ask for their money back. And luckily, there was one standout Sand Hill Road investor who said, we back our founders, and I'm on this call as a courtesy to you guys. And he hung up the phone. And I think about that as we sort of move into more turbulent times, about what's going to keep these investors sort of honest and high integrity and supportive of companies that they clearly saw something in to back.
I think also there's this interesting thing where so generally I would say the venture ecosystem has like a slight level of accountability because reputation is important and people do care about upholding and maintaining that. But what's interesting is like companies where it was harder to fundraise in the first place are the ones who take checks from people that don't care about that so much, that are the people who are going to pull the shadier stuff later down the line. And so you're just getting like double shafted. It's like, it's harder to raise the money in the outset, either because your business is in a different space or you don't have the same connections, or some things, not making it the like fantasy TechCrunch journal, which not very many people have. But for people where it is harder to start off with, it maintains being more challenging because you don't have these like really experienced, reputable, like powerful networks of VCs, which also generally behave a bit better because of accountability. Not guaranteed. There's still like shady behavior that happens everywhere. But I do think it's, if you've taken money from, not big, well-known funds, then you also get people who act in very different, unpredictable and unexpected ways.
I often think about how sometimes the wisdom is to not take too much capital, sets the bar too high for the next round of financing. But at the end of the day, I think it gives you something that is invaluable, which is hopefully enough capital to get you to the point where you are, Robyn, where you can not have to enter those conversations with desperation and the need to raise capital, but just the desire to raise capital to fuel some product or growth initiative that you have. As we wind down, do you have any sort of final words of advice for other founders who might be in the position of not having a super hot company or having to talk to investors who may not be sort of the upper echelon of VCs, and how they can come through on the other side with a business that is meaningful and profitable?
I've always thought that it's some form of like volume game. Like I have friends who in theory should be in a hot space, but haven't been the hot ones just because for whatever reason it hasn't panned out that way. But I do believe like there will be enough. It is just how many people you get to and you get through to get that, to make it to the next stage. And I think it means you do take money from not ideal folks. And that's, that other phrase that all cash is green. When you want this company to survive and you care about that beyond anything, you will take the money and you try and make the best decisions you can about the right money. But at the end of the day, you just go with it. And it buys you time, as you say, that's what this gets you, is time to figure out the next stage of stuff. But I think just keep going through. I remember talking to people who are they feel like they've run out of investors to contact or funding sources to go for. And there are always more, that it's just digging at all of this is always digging deeper, just keeping pushing through. There will always be a yes somewhere. It's just how many people you have to speak to get to it.
And especially with regulatory changes on being able to have general solicitations and an ethos, I think, that we've built up over the last 5-10 years of sort of crowdfunding things, I do think that there are a lot of options. But I would say, as a former lawyer, to make sure that you have great counsel, because you want to make sure you're in a position where you understand exactly what you're getting into, and what the ramifications are for that capital.
Yeah, I would say there's like so many times people are like, oh, if that becomes a problem, it's a good problem to have. But then when it does come up as a problem, you're like, I wish that I had been more aware of how bad a problem that would have been when it came up. So I would say that I didn't spend as much time with lawyers earlier on as I wish that I would have. And I think I used to get sucked into like the big glossy legal firms, and like don't do that, like, or like have them for certain things, and then have a general counsel advisor, someone that you can pick the phone up to all the time, supports you, supports the business, like allocate that money every month and get the advice before you're making certain choices. Well,
thank you so much for joining me today, Robyn. I really appreciate it. Again, thank you, Robyn Exton, CEO and founder of Her. Please check out her app, and best of luck to her going forward.